Dear friends, today I invite you to step into a journey, one that goes beyond what we think we know, into the heart of a message so radical, so full of life, that it demands we pause, listen, and transform. Imagine you've been handed an ancient scroll, hidden in plain sight for centuries, from a land whose faith and endurance against all odds inspire awe. That scroll whispers to you not merely stories of the past, but alive truths for today, for you. In the traditions of the ancient Ethiopian church, in the texts of the Ethiopian Bible, there lives a voice of Christ's teaching more direct, more rooted, more transformative than perhaps we've heard before. It challenges our comfort, it stirs our soul, it demands authenticity, and today I want to walk with you through 10 key revelations, 10 truths from what Jesus really taught his followers as revealed through this rich source. These truths are not simply knowledge, they are invitations to live differently, to love deeply, to walk in purpose. So take a deep breath, open your heart, let the ancient light of truth shine in you so that you may emerge from what's comfortable into what's real. Let's begin. When you look at the life and teachings of Jesus through the lens of the Ethiopian tradition, one truth becomes strikingly clear. He didn't come to create a hierarchy of holiness. He didn't come to form a spiritual club where some people sit in the front row and others are left outside the door. He came to level the ground beneath our feet. He came to remind humanity that before God, there are no titles, no rankings, no insiders or outsiders, only sons and daughters. The Ethiopian Bible captures this truth with a clarity that shakes the ego and comforts the heart. It shows a Jesus who didn't just talk about equality. He lived it, breathed it, embodied it, even when doing so made him unpopular, misunderstood, and hated. Think about the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts. Here's a man who, by all societal standards, should have been excluded. He was a foreigner, an outsider, someone who lived on the margins of what was considered acceptable. Yet God sent one of his apostles directly to him. Not to a king, not to a priest, not to a rich merchant, but to a man who had been dismissed by the world. That's not coincidence. That's the heart of the gospel. That's the sound of heaven tearing down the walls that humans build. The Ethiopian texts emphasize this encounter because it's more than history. It's a message. It tells us that divine love doesn't recognize the barriers we've created. It doesn't care about skin color, social status, education, or wealth. It looks straight into the human soul and says, "You are mine." But if we're honest, equality sounds beautiful until it costs us something. It's easy to preach love for all. It's harder to practice it when we meet someone whose story challenges our comfort. When Jesus said, "Follow me," he wasn't inviting people to agree with his philosophy. He was calling them to live it. And that means seeing the humanity in everyone we meet, even in those we've been taught to avoid. Every morning when you wake up, you are faced with choices. Maybe you scroll through social media and see people you disagree with. Maybe you pass someone on the street who looks broken or lost. Maybe you're tempted to label them, to put them in a box. But the teachings preserved in the Ethiopian tradition challenge that instinct. They remind us that the face of God is not found only in those who look, act, or believe like us. It's found in every person we encounter. Let's be real, it's easier to love the idea of humanity than it is to love actual humans. People will hurt you, disappoint you, frustrate you. Yet that's exactly where this teaching comes alive. Radical equality isn't just about treating others with fairness. It's about learning to see divine worth in people, even when they don't see it in themselves. It's about offering dignity when the world offers disdain. Picture this, a wealthy businessman walking past a man sleeping on the sidewalk. The world sees difference, the kingdom sees sameness. Both are human, both are precious, both are image, bearers of the Creator. The Ethiopian perspective doesn't stop at compassion. It pushes us toward communion, the idea that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. And when you truly embrace that, something changes in you. You start to listen differently, you start to lead differently, you start to realize that equality is not just a moral obligation, it's spiritual alignment, because when you degrade someone else, you don't just wound them, you distance yourself from the heart of God. When you honor another person, even silently, even through a small act of kindness, you draw closer to divine truth. Imagine what our world would look like if we all lived like that. Imagine workplaces where every voice was valued, families where every person felt seen, communities where differences didn't divide but enriched. This isn't just idealism. It's the way things were meant to be. And deep down, we all know it. That's why injustice stirs our anger, why discrimination makes our spirit restless. It's because our souls recognize imbalance. We were created for equality. In the Ethiopian tradition, the cross is not a symbol of privilege, it's a place of union. Everyone stands on level ground there, kings and beggars, the proud and the broken, the insider and the forgotten. And maybe that's the point. Until we can see each other as equals at the cross, we can't truly call ourselves followers of the one who hung upon it. So ask yourself, who have you overlooked? Who have you dismissed as not like me? Maybe today is the day you begin to see them differently. Maybe today you choose to listen, to honor, to stand beside someone instead of above them. Because when you do, you don't just practice equality, you participate in the divine. You become part of the story Jesus began long ago, a story that continues to echo through time, from the deserts of Ethiopia to your heart right now. There are no second-class souls in the kingdom of God. When Jesus spoke about the kingdom of God, he wasn't describing a faraway paradise or a dream waiting for us after death. He was pointing to something that begins here, in this moment, in the choices we make, in how we treat people, in how we love. The Ethiopian Bible captures this message with a depth that pulls you in. It reminds us that the kingdom isn't just a promise for later. It's a reality we are meant to live right now. It's not a destination. It's a transformation. Every act of compassion, every step toward forgiveness, every decision to do right when it would be easier to do wrong, becomes a brick in that living kingdom. Too many people spend their lives waiting. Waiting for the perfect time, waiting for God to fix everything, waiting for the world to change before they act. But the truth that Jesus taught, and the Ethiopian texts emphasize, is that the kingdom of God doesn't wait for conditions to improve. It grows in the middle of brokenness. It blooms in the cracks of pain. Think of the cross as the center of that message. It was not the end, it was the beginning. It was not defeat, it was the seed of victory planted in darkness. And when that seed grows in you, you stop asking, when will things get better? And you start saying, how can I bring better into the world right now? There's a story told about a small group of believers in Ethiopia who began feeding children in their village during a famine. They didn't have much, just enough grain to make one meal a day, but as they worked together, they began to see something powerful: hope, unity, joy. They said, "We may not have heaven on earth, but heaven has entered our hearts." That's what the kingdom looks like. It's when faith becomes visible through action, when love becomes louder than fear, when hope becomes stronger than despair. Think about your own life. How often have you told yourself, when I have more time, then I'll help? Or when I'm less stressed, I'll forgive? Or when my life is stable, then I'll start living with purpose? But the Ethiopian wisdom invites you to see that the kingdom doesn't wait for ideal circumstances. It starts in the mess. Jesus didn't wait for people to be perfect before he healed them. He didn't wait for crowds to be ready before he taught. He met people where they were, broken, confused, lost, and turned their ordinary lives into sacred ground. That same call reaches out to you. Stop waiting for your life to be ready. Start living the kingdom where you are. The most powerful part of this teaching is that it doesn't just change how you see faith, it changes how you see yourself. Because if the kingdom of God is here, then you're not powerless. You are part of something divine unfolding through your life. Every word you speak, every decision you make, every act of love is kingdom work. When you comfort a friend in pain, when you give without expecting return, when you refuse to gossip, when you stand for truth even if it costs you, heaven is touching earth through you. That's not poetic language. That's the reality Jesus described when he said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Now imagine if you started each day with that mindset. Imagine waking up not asking, "What will I get today?" But what can I give today that reflects God's heart? You'd start noticing beauty in small things, the smile of a stranger, the quiet courage of someone fighting through hardship, the peace that comes from forgiving when you don't have to. You'd begin to realize that miracles aren't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they're subtle, like the shift in your attitude when you choose kindness over judgment, or the warmth that fills your heart when you help without being asked. The Ethiopian tradition calls this living restoration, the idea that every moment of genuine love rebuilds what was lost in humanity's fall. The cross is not just a symbol of pain, it's a declaration that even in the darkest moment, God's light still works through us. So when you walk into a workplace full of tension or a home filled with silence, remember, you are a carrier of that light. The kingdom enters when you do, and maybe that's the hardest truth of all, that heaven is not waiting for you in the distance. It's waiting for you to awaken to it now. When Jesus said, "Follow me," he wasn't offering an escape from the world, he was inviting us to transform it. He was calling ordinary people, fishermen, tax collectors, farmers, and dreamers, to become reflections of divine life in a hurting world. That's what the Ethiopian Bible captures so beautifully. It doesn't separate faith from daily living. It weaves them together into one sacred story. So, as you move through your day, remember this. Every time you choose love over apathy, every time you lift someone's spirit, every time you refuse to give up on goodness, you are building the kingdom of God on earth. And that's where real faith lives, not in waiting for heaven to come down, but in realizing heaven begins when you stand up. When Jesus called people to follow him, he wasn't offering a religion. He was offering transformation. He didn't come to fill minds with information. He came to awaken hearts to a new way of living. The Ethiopian Bible captures this essence in a deeply human way. It teaches that the cross is not simply a story about sacrifice. It's a mirror reflecting what happens when we allow God to reshape us from within. In that sense, discipleship is not about memorizing scripture or performing rituals. It's about becoming someone new. It's the process of unlearning everything the world has told you about who you are and discovering who you were created to be. You see, information can change what you know, but transformation changes who you are. The world is full of people who can quote wisdom yet live without peace, people who know the words of love but struggle to show it, people who speak of faith yet carry resentment, fear, and pride. Jesus didn't want followers who could simply recite lessons. He wanted lives that embodied them. That's what makes his message so revolutionary. It's not about accumulation, it's about surrender. The Ethiopian teachings remind us that to truly follow him is to walk through fire, to face yourself honestly, and to let go of the parts of you that block the light from shining through. Think about how transformation actually happens. It's rarely glamorous. It's often quiet, difficult, and deeply personal. It happens in those moments when you realize that your comfort zone has become your cage. It happens when you're forced to confront patterns that no longer serve you: anger, bitterness, jealousy, fear. And instead of running, you stay, you face them, you choose growth over escape. The Ethiopian faith describes this as the renewal of the inner self, the slow but powerful work of grace that rebuilds you from the inside out. It's not about pretending to be holy, it's about becoming whole. There's a story of an Ethiopian man who once said, "I went to church every Sunday for years, but I didn't meet God until I forgave my brother." That's transformation. It's when your actions begin to align with your beliefs, when your prayers are no longer just words, but a reflection of the person you are becoming. Jesus often spoke in parables because he knew transformation couldn't be taught through logic alone. It had to be lived, felt, experienced. Like a seed buried in the soil, something must die for something greater to grow. In today's world, transformation feels almost out of reach. We live in a culture obsessed with image and speed. We scroll through endless screens filled with advice on how to improve ourselves, how to be more productive, more attractive, more successful. But Jesus' version of transformation isn't about polishing your image, it's about purifying your heart. The Ethiopian tradition reminds us that spiritual change is not a self-help project, it's divine surgery. You cannot transform yourself by willpower alone. You must allow grace to do what pride cannot. When that grace begins to work in you, you'll notice something profound. Your desires start to shift. You no longer crave applause, you crave authenticity. You no longer fight to be right, you seek to understand. You no longer chase what's temporary, you hunger for what's eternal. And as that happens, the people around you will notice too. You'll stop reacting with anger and start responding with patience. You'll begin to see beauty in places you once ignored. You'll feel peace in situations that used to shake you. That's what real transformation looks like. It's subtle, steady, and undeniable. But here's the truth that's hard to accept. Transformation will cost you. It will cost your pride, your comfort, your need to control everything. You can't cling to your old ways and expect a new life to emerge. The Ethiopian Bible portrays the cross as more than a symbol of suffering. It's the doorway to renewal. It's the moment where surrender becomes victory. Every time you choose humility over ego, forgiveness over revenge, faith over fear, you're carrying that cross, and in doing so, you are becoming who you were meant to be. There's a story of a business leader in Addis Ababa who said that his faith became real the day he realized his work wasn't about profit but purpose. He began paying fair wages, treating his workers like family, and building a company based on integrity. His profits didn't drop, they grew, because transformation doesn't just bless your soul, it blesses everything you touch. It creates ripples that change homes, communities, even generations. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped collecting information and started living transformation? What if you stopped reading about peace and began creating it? What if you stopped talking about love and began becoming love? That's the challenge Jesus placed before his followers, and that's the heartbeat of the Ethiopian teaching. Let your faith move from your head to your heart, from your heart to your hands, and from your hands into the world. Because transformation is not what you know, it's what you become. Jesus never intended for anyone to walk alone. When he spoke about following him, he was always gathering people together, building connection, creating community. The Ethiopian Bible carries that truth like a heartbeat through its pages. It teaches that faith is not a solitary journey, it's a shared one. It reminds us that spirituality was never meant to isolate us from others, but to bind us closer together in compassion, service, and love. The cross, as described in this ancient tradition, is not only a symbol of redemption, it's the meeting point where all of humanity stands together, equal and connected, beneath the shadow of grace. In our world today, we glorify independence. We're told that strength means handling everything on our own, that success is about outpacing others, that needing people is a weakness. But that's not how Jesus lived. He surrounded himself with imperfect people. He broke bread with friends, he wept openly, he asked for prayer in his darkest hour. Even the Son of God chose community over isolation. The Ethiopian perspective sees this not as a sign of frailty, but as the model of divine strength, because only in community can love fully express itself. You can't practice forgiveness alone. You can't show patience in isolation. You can't serve humanity without being among people. Think about what happens when you try to carry your burdens by yourself. At first, it seems noble. You tell yourself, I'll handle it, I'll be fine. But slowly, the weight begins to press down. Your strength fades. Your heart feels smaller. Life begins to lose its color. That's what isolation does. It drains the life out of you one quiet day at a time. The Ethiopian teachings urge us to resist that pull toward loneliness. They remind us that the body of believers, the people around you who share your journey, are not optional. They are the support beams that hold you up when your faith feels weak. There's a story from Ethiopia about a small village struck by drought. Crops failed, rivers dried up, hope seemed lost, but instead of waiting for help to come, the people gathered every morning at the local church. They prayed, they shared what little food they had, and they were built together. When rain finally came, they didn't say, "God answered my prayer." They said, "God answered our prayer." That hour is what community sounds like. It's the difference between surviving and living, between despair and resilience. When people come together, the impossible becomes possible, not because they are strong, but because unity creates strength that isolation never can. Look around your own life. How many people do you see struggling silently, pretending to be fine? Maybe one of them is you. Maybe you've built walls instead of bridges. Maybe you've convinced yourself that no one would understand your pain. But what if the healing you've been waiting for is hidden in connection? What if God's answer to your loneliness is not another distraction or achievement, but a person? Someone you can trust, someone you can help, someone who reminds you that you're not alone. That's what the kingdom of God looks like in practice. People carrying each other's burdens, standing together in joy and in struggle, reminding one another that grace is real. The Ethiopian church's long history is built on this principle. Its people have endured invasions, persecution, famine, and hardship, yet their faith has endured because it is communal. They don't just worship together, they live together. They share life in its fullness, meals, laughter, labor, and loss. Their faith is not an individual possession, it's a shared inheritance, and maybe that's what we've lost in modern life. The sense that we belong to one another, that your success is my joy, and my pain is your concern. Jesus understood that people need people. That's why he sent his followers out 2 by 2. That's why he built a table before he built a pulpit. That's why he washed his disciples' feet, to show them that the greatest love is expressed in serving one another. The Ethiopian tradition embraces this idea deeply. It's not enough to believe in God. You must live out that belief through relationships. Because love isn't proven in isolation. It's proven in how we treat those around us. Imagine a world where we all practiced that, where we stopped competing and started caring, where churches became places of healing instead of judgment, where families listened more and blamed less, where neighbors didn't just nod politely but truly knew each other's names, each other's struggles, each other's hearts. That's the kind of community Jesus envisioned, the kind that changes everything. And maybe, just maybe, this message finds you at a time when you've been withdrawing. Maybe you've been hiding behind a smile, pretending to have it all together. But you don't have to do this alone. Reach out, open your heart, join hands with others who are walking the same path. Because when you stand shoulder to shoulder with people who believe in you, the storms don't feel as strong, and the road doesn't seem as long. Community doesn't remove pain, but it transforms it. It takes loneliness and turns it into belonging. It takes despair and turns it into hope. And when you live like that, when you let others in and become part of something bigger than yourself, you begin to see what Jesus really meant when he said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there." Because that's where heaven touches earth, in the space between you and another soul who dares to love. Integrity is the kind of strength that doesn't need applause. It's quiet, steady, and often unseen. But it's what holds your character together when no one's watching. In the teachings preserved within the Ethiopian Bible, this truth is repeated again and again. The foundation of real faith isn't in what you say you believe, it's in how you live when no one is there to see it. The ancient writings describe Jesus speaking to his followers privately, away from the crowds, teaching them not to perform righteousness for attention but to live it out in truth. Because the kingdom of God isn't built on image, it's built on integrity. We live in a time where appearance often matters more than substance. People curate their lives for approval, chasing validation through likes, titles, or recognition. But Jesus' message cuts through all that noise. He says, be real. Be who you are when the cameras are off, when no one is there to reward you, when doing the right thing costs you something. That's the kind of authenticity that builds unshakable character. The Ethiopian tradition calls this purity of heart, a life aligned with truth even when the world isn't watching. It's the understanding that God doesn't measure you by how impressive you look, but by how honest you are when no one else is there. Think about how many choices you make in private, the ones no one ever sees, the small decisions that build or break your integrity. Maybe it's about honesty in your work, faithfulness in your relationships, compassion in your thoughts. The truth is, the world may never celebrate those choices, but heaven does. The Ethiopian writings remind believers that faith is not performance, it's principle. There's a story from the highlands of Ethiopia about a young carpenter who found a wallet filled with money left behind by a traveler. He could have kept it. No one saw him find it, but something inside him said, "Do what's right." He walked miles to return it. Later, that same traveler hired him for work that changed his life. That's the unseen power of integrity. It returns blessings when you least expect it. Integrity doesn't mean perfection, it means consistency. It means that your private world and your public world match. The person you are in the quiet should reflect the same values you show in the open. When Jesus warned against hypocrisy, he wasn't condemning people for failing. He was inviting them to live honestly, to admit weakness instead of pretending strength, to confess faults instead of hiding them. The Ethiopian texts capture that same humility. They emphasize that a faithful heart isn't spotless, but sincere. It's the heart that falls and gets back up with honesty that God treasures. There's a deep peace that comes with integrity. You stop living in fragments. You stop worrying about being found out or misunderstood. You walk in freedom because you know your actions align with your truth. It's like breathing clean air in a polluted world. You no longer need to explain yourself or defend your image. Your life speaks for itself. That's what integrity does. It simplifies your soul. Now think about what happens when integrity is lost. The moment we start compromising little things, we open cracks in our foundation. Maybe you lie to avoid confrontation. Maybe you cut corners at work. Maybe you act kind in public but harbor bitterness in private. Slowly, those small cracks become deep fractures. You might still look whole on the outside, but inside you begin to crumble. That's why Jesus emphasized private obedience, because what happens in the dark shapes what shines in the light. The Ethiopian Bible presents this idea through vivid imagery. It describes the heart as a house built on truth, with every act of honesty strengthening its walls. But every deception, every compromise weakens it. The question is, what kind of house are you building? Are you building on solid ground, or on sand that shifts when pressure comes? Because the storms will come. Life will test you. Temptations, disappointments, moments where you can choose the easy path or the right one. Integrity is what keeps you standing when those storms hit. A business leader once said, "Integrity is doing the right thing when it costs you profit." A teacher might say, "It's being fair when no one checks your grading." A student might say, "It's studying when cheating would be easier." But at its heart, integrity isn't about rules, it's about love. Love for truth, love for others, love for God. It's the awareness that every decision echoes beyond you, that your private actions shape your public influence. When you choose integrity, even in small things, something profound happens. Your confidence grows, your words carry weight, and your presence brings trust. People can sense authenticity. It's magnetic because it's rare. The Ethiopian faith has survived centuries of trials not because of wealth or power, but because of integrity. Its believers held their truth through persecution, through hardship, through silence, and their endurance became their witness. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? What kind of person are you becoming in the quiet corners of your life? Because that's where your legacy is built. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Integrity doesn't demand perfection. It asks for honesty. It asks for courage when compromise feels easier. It asks you to do right, not for applause, but because it's right. And in that quiet, steady obedience, you'll find something stronger than reputation. You'll find peace. When you look closely at the teachings of Jesus through the Ethiopian tradition, one message stands out with stunning clarity. Greatness in God's eyes is not measured by how much power you hold, but by how much love you give. In a world obsessed with status, wealth, and recognition, Jesus turned everything upside down. He showed that the most powerful people are not the ones sitting on thrones. They're the ones kneeling to serve. The Ethiopian Bible reflects this truth vividly. It describes the cross not as a throne of glory, but as an altar of humility, where the Son of God lowered himself to lift humanity up. That image isn't just symbolic, it's the blueprint for how we're meant to live. Think about that for a moment. The Son of God, the one who had all authority, chose to wash the feet of fishermen. He chose compassion over command, service over self. That act wasn't weakness, it was divine strength. The Ethiopian faith holds that every time we serve another person, we participate in that same divine act. We become mirrors of God's love in the world. Service is not just charity, it's transformation. It changes both the one who gives and the one who receives, but service is not always glamorous. Sometimes it means doing things no one notices. It's helping a coworker who gets all the credit. It's forgiving someone who will never say sorry. It's listening to a friend who's too broken to thank you. True service costs something. It costs your ego, your comfort, your time. Yet, it's in that quiet sacrifice where real joy is born. The Ethiopian texts call it holy humility, the kind of service that doesn't seek to impress but to bless. There's a story of a teacher in Addis Ababa who began holding weekend lessons for children who couldn't afford school. She had little money, few resources, and no formal recognition. But every week, those children showed up, eager to learn. Years later, one of those children became a doctor and returned to build a free clinic for the community. When he was asked what inspired him, he said, "It was the woman who gave her time when no one else saw me." That's what service does, it multiplies. One act of love can ripple through generations, and yet we often confuse service with pity. We think helping others makes us superior, but that's not the kind of service Jesus taught. He didn't serve from above, he served from beside. He sat with the rejected, touched the sick, spoke with the forgotten. He didn't say, "I'll fix you." He said, "I'm with you." That's a powerful difference. Serving from beside means recognizing the shared humanity in every person you meet. It means seeing someone not as a project, but as a person. The Ethiopian wisdom teaches that when you serve others, you are not lowering yourself. You are raising the divine within you. Imagine what would happen if the world began to live that way. If leaders saw their positions as platforms for service, not self-interest. If families practiced kindness before judgment. If neighbors looked out for one another, the world wouldn't just be kinder, it would be transformed. Because service is the language of heaven spoken on earth. It breaks down walls, heals wounds, and builds bridges where division once stood. But serving the least isn't always easy. It will test your patience. It will challenge your pride. Sometimes it will even break your heart. Yet, the Ethiopian cross reminds us that sacrifice and beauty can exist in the same space. You may never be thanked. You may never be noticed. But God sees what the world overlooks, and in His eyes, every quiet act of service becomes an eternal seed. Think about the people you encounter daily. The janitor who cleans your office late at night, the cashier working long hours, the neighbor struggling silently. The call of Jesus is not to look past them, but to look into them, to see their worth, to recognize their struggle, to extend your hand, because serving them is not about charity, it's about recognition. It's acknowledging that they carry the same divine spark that you do. One of the most beautiful things about the Ethiopian Christian faith is how it embodies this truth in community life. Churches, they're often double as places of refuge, hospitals for the poor, kitchens for the hungry. People give not out of abundance but out of faith. They believe service is not something you do when you have extra. It's something you do because it's who you are. They understand that in lifting others, you rise too. So what does this mean for you? It means asking yourself, how can I serve where I am? Maybe it's mentoring someone who's lost. Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you. Maybe it's speaking kindness when silence would be easier. Service doesn't require a title. It requires a heart willing to see others the way God sees them. The truth is, the more you give of yourself, the more alive you become. Every time you serve without expectation, something inside you expands. You begin to understand what Jesus meant when he said, "The greatest among you will be the servant of all." The Ethiopian Bible shows that the path to greatness is not a climb upward, it's a journey downward into humility, compassion, and love. Because in serving others, you find the deepest truth of all. You were never meant to stand above anyone. You were meant to stand beside them. Forgiveness is one of the most radical teachings of Jesus, and in the Ethiopian Bible, it carries a weight and depth that goes beyond just saying, "I forgive you." It's not simply about letting someone off the hook, it's about freeing yourself from the poison of resentment. It's about releasing what is holding your spirit hostage. The Ethiopian tradition reminds us that forgiveness is a form of strength, not weakness. It's an act of rebellion against bitterness, a declaration that someone else's wrong will not define your heart. We live in a world that celebrates revenge. People say, "Don't let them get away with it. Make them pay. Show them who you are." But Jesus flipped that script completely. He taught, "Love your enemies, bless those who curse you." The Ethiopian texts capture this message vividly, portraying forgiveness not as blind tolerance, but as divine vision, the ability to see the person beyond their mistake. It's seeing someone not as the wound they caused, but as a soul still capable of change. That's hard. Sometimes it feels impossible, but it's also the path to real freedom. Think about what happens when you hold on to anger. It becomes like carrying a heavy stone in your heart. At first, you think it gives you power. You think it protects you. But over time, it exhausts you. It darkens your thoughts, it shapes your choices, it steals your peace. And the person who hurt you, they often move on, unaware of the prison you're living in. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean pretending it was okay. It means saying, "This pain will not control me anymore." It's setting down the stone so you can walk again. The Ethiopian Bible tells stories of forgiveness that pierce the heart. There's one about a man who betrayed his brother over an inheritance, leading to years of silence and hatred. But when famine struck, the betrayed brother shared his food without bitterness, without conditions. When asked why, he said, "If I let hate starve him, my soul would starve too." That is what forgiveness does. It feeds your soul. It doesn't erase justice, but it replaces vengeance with mercy. Jesus modeled this in the most powerful way possible, on the cross. When nails tore through his hands and the crowd mocked him, he said, "Father, forgive them." Not after the pain was over, not when they apologized. In the middle of his suffering, he chose forgiveness. The Ethiopian scriptures describe that moment not just as an act of mercy, but as the triumph of divine love over human cruelty. It was the moment when love refused to die. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation is always possible. Some people remain toxic. Some situations are unsafe. Forgiveness doesn't mean you must return to harm. It means you stop carrying it inside you. It means you let go so you can heal, even if the relationship never restores. That's an important distinction the Ethiopian texts emphasize. Forgiveness is about freedom, not foolishness. It's about unchaining yourself from the past, not pretending it never happened. There's a woman in Gondar whose story embodies this truth. Her son was killed in a robbery. The man responsible was caught and sentenced. Years later, she visited him in prison, not to curse him, but to tell him she forgave him. She said, "I will not let hate take another son from me." That act didn't excuse what he did, but it broke the cycle of pain. The man later said her forgiveness changed his life. He turned his heart toward God. This is the quiet power of forgiveness. It can transform the very ground where hatred once grew. But let's be honest, sometimes forgiving feels unfair. Sometimes the hurt is too deep. Maybe it was betrayal from someone you trusted. Maybe it was abuse. Maybe it was words that shattered your confidence. You wonder, how can I forgive when they don't even care? The Ethiopian wisdom reminds us, you forgive for your soul, not theirs. Forgiveness is not approval, it's release. It's saying, "I choose peace over poison," and that peace becomes your strength. What if you started forgiving not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace? What if forgiveness became your act of self-love, your way of reclaiming control over your own heart? The Ethiopian writings describe forgiveness as a river. It begins as a small spring inside you, but once released, it flows outward, cleansing everything in its path. It softens hardened hearts. It restores clarity where confusion once lived. It heals not just relationships, but generations. In a divided world where people build walls out of offense, forgiveness is a revolution. It dismantles those walls. It says, I will not return hate for hate. It's the most powerful form of love, the kind that refuses to keep score, the kind that sees beyond failure to possibility, the kind that heals what bitterness destroys. And maybe that's what Jesus really wanted us to understand, that forgiveness isn't a one-time event, it's a way of life. Every day you choose it, even in small ways. Every time you release a grudge, you create space for grace. Every time you choose compassion over resentment, you become more like the one who forgave first, and that is where true peace begins, not in revenge, but in release. If you want to understand what made Jesus' message truly revolutionary, you have to look at how he redefined what it means to love. In the Ethiopian Bible, this love isn't sentimental or shallow. It's a force that changes everything it touches. It's not about affection that comes and goes with mood or convenience. It's about action, sacrifice, and courage. The Ethiopian tradition calls it a living love, a love that breathes, works, and endures. It's the kind of love that doesn't ask what it can get, but what it can give. Jesus didn't just tell people to love one another, he showed them how. He loved the people society had thrown away, the lepers, the poor, the foreigners, the sinners. He didn't love them because they were lovable, he loved them because they were his. That's the kind of love the Ethiopian writings emphasize, love that sees value where the world sees none. Love that looks beyond what's visible and recognizes the image of God in every face. It's not easy love, it's love that costs you something. It's love that requires vulnerability. Think about how different our lives would look if we lived that way. Most of us love conditionally. We love when people treat us well, when they agree with us, when it's easy. But the moment someone disappoints or hurts us, that love begins to shrink. The Ethiopian understanding of Jesus' teaching challenges this. It says if your love depends on comfort, it's not love, it's convenience. Real love shows up even when it hurts, it forgives, it listens, it stays. There's a story told in Ethiopian villages about a farmer who lived near a mountain where wild lions roamed. One day, his neighbor's child wandered too far and was attacked by one of those lions. The farmer risked his life to chase the animal away, carrying the wounded child back to safety. When people asked why he did it, he said, because love is the courage to move when fear says stop. That's what love looks like when it's alive. It moves toward pain instead of running from it. Jesus' love was like that. It wasn't afraid of mess or brokenness. He didn't avoid the unclean or the unwanted. He walked right into the places everyone else avoided. The Ethiopian Bible describes how his compassion was fierce and yielding. It wasn't weak or soft. It was powerful enough to break the chains of shame and rebuild people's dignity. Love in that context wasn't emotion, it was restoration. It took the forgotten and said, you belong. And that's something we all crave, isn't it? To belong, to be seen and valued as we are. The reason Jesus' love still speaks across centuries is because it meets that deepest human need. It tells us we're more than our mistakes, more than our failures. It reminds us that no one is beyond redemption. When you love others like that, without judgment, without condition, you become a reflection of that same divine love. But let's be honest, loving like that isn't simple. It's easy to love people who are kind, grateful, or like-minded. It's much harder to love those who drain you, criticize you, or betray you. Yet, that's where love becomes holy. That's where love transforms you. The Ethiopian monks used to say, if you want to know God, love your enemy. Because it's in that act, when you give love where none is expected, that you touch something divine. There's a powerful truth in that. Love isn't about being right, it's about being real. You can have all the knowledge, all the success, all the righteousness, but without love it's empty. Jesus said, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Not if you preach the loudest or pray the longest, but if you love. The Ethiopian faith carries that teaching deeply. It's not your words that define your faith, it's your actions. And those actions start small. A word of kindness to someone who feels invisible, a meal shared with someone who can't repay you, a moment of patience when you'd rather be angry. That's where love begins, in the quiet, ordinary places. The Ethiopian Bible teaches that love is not something you feel, it's something you practice until it becomes who you are. One woman once said, "I thought loving others meant losing myself, but I learned that real love doesn't drain you, it multiplies you," and she was right. The more you love, the more your heart expands, the more you give, the more you receive. Love doesn't run out. It grows stronger with every act of compassion. That's the mystery Jesus revealed. Love is not a limited resource, it's divine energy flowing through you. When you live with that kind of love, something profound happens. Your life becomes lighter, your relationships deepen, your soul finds peace. You stop keeping score, stop living with bitterness, stop expecting perfection. You begin to see the world through new eyes that notice beauty in brokenness, light in darkness, possibility in pain. And maybe that's what Jesus really taught, that love is not a command to obey, but a nature to awaken. The Ethiopian Bible reminds us, the heart that loves is the heart that truly lives, because when love becomes your foundation, every action becomes sacred, every person becomes precious, and every day becomes an opportunity to reveal God's heart through your own. Faith, as revealed in the Ethiopian Bible, isn't just about believing in something unseen. It's about trusting even when everything around you feels uncertain. It's not blind optimism or wishful thinking. It's the deep conviction that there's purpose in the pain, that even in silence, God is still moving. The Ethiopian tradition teaches that faith is the quiet fire that keeps the soul alive when the night feels endless. It's not loud or dramatic, it's steady, unwavering, and often forged in the darkest valleys. Jesus didn't ask his followers to have perfect faith, he asked them to have living faith, a faith that breathes through doubt, fear, and hardship. Think about Peter walking on water. The moment he fixed his eyes on Jesus, he stood above the storm, but the moment he looked at the waves, he began to sink. That story isn't about failure, it's about focus. The Ethiopian texts explain that true faith doesn't mean you never fall. It means you keep reaching, keep trusting, even when you're sinking. It's the act of turning your gaze back to what holds you steady. We live in a world that glorifies control. We want to predict, to plan, to know everything. But faith begins where control ends. It's choosing to walk when you can't see the whole path. The Ethiopian Bible calls this walking in the mist. It's the belief that even when the horizon is hidden, the next step is guided. It's hard, because uncertainty makes us feel small. But faith transforms that smallness into strength. It reminds us that the one who created the mountains also walks beside us through the fog. There's a story told among Ethiopian believers about a shepherd who lost his flock in a storm. The winds howled, the rain poured, and visibility vanished. All he could do was call out their names and take one step at a time, trusting that his voice would reach them. By morning, when the storm cleared, he found every sheep gathered near his call. That's what faith feels like. You don't always see the outcome. You just keep calling, keep believing, and somehow grace meets you in the storm. Faith doesn't erase fear, it redefines it. It's not the absence of doubt, but the courage to keep moving despite it. The Ethiopian texts describe faith as a lamp, not a floodlight. It doesn't illuminate the whole road, only the step before you. But that step is enough. Every act of trust strengthens the next. Every prayer whispered in weakness builds the courage to stand tomorrow. That's why Jesus often told people, "Your faith has made you whole." Because faith is healing, it restores the connection between your heart and your hope. In a time where logic often outweighs belief, it's easy to think faith is outdated, that it belongs to simpler times. But faith is not ignorance. It's intelligence of the soul. It's seeing patterns where others see chaos. It's hearing meaning in the silence. The Ethiopian Bible beautifully expresses this through imagery. Faith is a seed planted in hidden soil. You don't see growth immediately, but beneath the surface, roots are spreading, preparing for something beautiful to rise. You might be going through a season right now where your prayers feel unanswered, where nothing seems to change. The Ethiopian wisdom says, this is the test of trust. When you can't trace God's hand, trust His heart. When you can't see the reason, lean on the relationship, because faith is not built on results, it's built on reliance. It's not about what happens, it's about who you become through it. There was a young woman in Lalibela who prayed every day for healing from an illness that left her bedridden. Years passed, and though her body didn't recover, her spirit grew unshakable. She began writing letters of encouragement to others who were sick, telling them they were not forgotten. People from across the region started visiting her for comfort. When asked where her strength came from, she smiled and said, "Faith taught me that even if my body breaks, my purpose doesn't." That's the kind of faith the Ethiopian Bible speaks of, a faith that transforms pain into power. Faith doesn't always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks like tears on your pillow, whispered prayers in the dark, or showing up when your heart feels empty. But heaven sees that. The Ethiopian tradition says that every act of quiet endurance is recorded in eternity. Because faith is the currency of the soul, it's what moves mountains in unseen realms. And maybe that's why Jesus said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Because it's not the size of your faith that matters, it's the strength of your surrender. It's trusting that God can use even your smallest belief to create something miraculous. Faith doesn't promise the absence of storms. It promises you won't face them alone. So when life feels heavy, when the road feels long, when prayers seem unanswered, remember this. Your faith is not failing just because you can't see the finish line. Sometimes the silence is sacred. Sometimes the waiting is where the miracle grows. And when that faith finally blossoms, you'll understand what the Ethiopian Bible has been saying all along. That the greatest strength in this life isn't certainty, it's trust. The kind of trust that says, even if I don't see it yet, I know God is still good. Hope, in the Ethiopian understanding of Jesus' teaching, is not a fragile wish. It is a defiant act of the soul. It is the quiet voice that whispers this is not the end, when the world screams otherwise. It is the lifeline that pulls you through despair, the anchor that holds steady when storms rage and walls close in. The Ethiopian Bible paints hope not as something passive, waiting for rescue, but as something active, alive, and resilient. A force that calls you to keep moving, keep believing, keep reaching, even when the future is unclear. Jesus' message was always about hope made visible. He told parables about seeds that grew in unlikely soil, lamps that lit the darkest corners, and lost sheep that were found against all odds. Each story was a signal to his followers that no situation is hopeless, no life beyond repair, and no heart beyond redemption. The Ethiopian texts emphasize that hope is rooted in the unshakable truth of God's presence. Even when circumstances fail, even when plans crumble, even when pain overwhelms, hope remains because it rests on God, not on outcomes. In our world, it's easy to confuse hope with optimism. Optimism is fragile. It depends on circumstances, on things going your way. Hope is stronger. Hope persists when optimism fades. It carries you through hospital corridors, through empty wallets, through broken relationships, through shattered dreams. It's what keeps the farmer sowing seeds in barren soil, the student studying despite failure, the parent loving despite hardship. Ethiopian Christians often describe hope as a hidden wellspring, bubbling quietly beneath despair, ready to refresh the soul when needed most. Consider a story from the highlands of Ethiopia. A village was hit by famine, crops failed, and many feared for their lives. In the midst of despair, the elders encouraged the children to plant a single seed each, promising that growth would come even if they couldn't yet see it. Years later, when the rains returned, those seeds had grown into abundant fields that fed the entire village. Hope, though invisible at first, had created life. That is the same hope Jesus teaches. A trust that small, faithful actions in the present will produce future life, even when you cannot see it yet. Hope does not erase suffering, it transforms it. It does not promise that pain will disappear, but that pain is not the final word. The Ethiopian texts highlight that hope is the lens through which trials are endured, not merely survived. It shapes how you see your own story. Instead of bitterness, you find resilience. Instead of despair, you find purpose. Instead of defeat, you find lessons that strengthen your soul. It's the thread that stitches together the broken pieces of life into a tapestry of meaning. One woman in Lalibela, paralyzed by illness for years, described hope as her daily prayer. I may not walk today, I may not see tomorrow, but I will trust that each breath is enough, that each heartbeat carries God's promise. She began sharing her story with neighbors and travelers, reminding them that hope is contagious. Even in immobility, her faith radiated strength and encouragement. That is the essence of hope as Jesus taught. It is not passive waiting, but active endurance and encouragement for others along the way. Hope asks us to hold on when giving up feels easier. It demands patience, perseverance, and courage. The Ethiopian scriptures suggest that every act of hope, even unseen, is stored in the eternal ledger of God's care, creating a momentum that carries life forward. It's the quiet determination to keep planting, keep loving, keep believing, even when the world says stop. It's what allows us to face loss with dignity, disappointment with courage, and setbacks with renewed determination. Perhaps the most radical aspect of hope is that it is contagious. When you carry hope, others see it and are drawn to it. It becomes a beacon for the weary, a lifeline for the broken, a reason to keep walking when the path is hard. The Ethiopian teachings show that communities survive and thrive not simply because of resources, but because of shared hope, a collective trust that tomorrow holds possibility, that God's goodness endures, that light always follows darkness. Hope is not a passive wish for things to be better. It is a declaration of faith in the face of impossibility. It is the courage to rise, to keep going, to keep loving, even when the outcome is uncertain. The Ethiopian Bible reminds us that the cross itself was the ultimate symbol of hope, darkness and suffering giving way to life and restoration. When Jesus rose, he proved that no power, no pain, no failure can extinguish the spark of hope that God plants in the human heart. So, when life feels unbearable, when you are surrounded by storms, remember that hope is not a distant promise. It is your companion, your strength, your light. It grows quietly, persists faithfully, and leads you forward. Every step you take in hope is a step into the kingdom, a step toward life that no circumstance can diminish, a step that carries both you and those around you closer to the enduring heart of God. Friends, these 10 truths are not abstractions. They are invitations. They demand something of you. They ask you to step out of the spectator seat of faith into the arena of life. They invite you to live like Jesus taught, radically, humbly, courageously, fully. Imagine now you stand at a threshold. On one side, a life of comfort, half-known faith, passive rituals. On the other side, a life of purpose, clarity, community, mission. The Ethiopian Bible's witness to Jesus' teaching calls you across. Will you take the step? Because what you do next matters. Your choices ripple. Your small acts become testimonies. Your faith becomes a movement, and what once was hidden, what once was buried, begins to shine through you. Go forward then, not as someone waiting for life to happen, but as someone making life happen. Not as someone watching the world from the sidelines, but as someone bringing heaven to earth. Serve the least, speak truth, live love, embrace the pain, shine integrity, surrender. The world needs this. Your world, your home, your workplace, your circle, needs this, and you were made for this. Now go, and live the truth you've heard. Let the revelation of what Jesus really taught his followers, as preserved in ancient Ethiopian faith, become the very fire in your bones. And let your life be the answer.